We're down to the last 4 teams in the Rugby World Cup in Japan, and there are 2 cracking battles between the hemispheres penned in to decide who will contest the final next Saturday, who will be battling it out for the Webb Ellis Trophy, and who will be joining Ireland on their couches back at home. Welcome to the JOEpan Rugby Show, previewing every game of the knockout stages of the Rugby World Cup, brought to you by Sports Joe in association with Air Sport. I'm Rob O'Hanrahan, and joining me to look ahead to the first of those semi-finals is former Munster and Ireland hooker Jerry Flannery. As has been the case in each of the last 8 World Cups, there will be no Irish presence past the quarter-final stage. Joe Schmidt's men were dumped out by a rampant All-Black side last Saturday and will be attempting to make some sense of a disappointing end to Schmidt's reign. Then it's on to the big one. Ireland's conquerors New Zealand take on an in-form England in Yokohama. It's England's first semi-final in 12 years, while it's New Zealand's 3rd in a row as they look to hold on to the trophy once again. And that one is set up to be a classic. Jerry, before we even get into England-New Zealand, it's hard to look past the negativity of Ireland's exit from the World Cup last Saturday. But before we even get into that negativity, I want to take a look at what the state of Ireland when Joe Schmidt took them over. They had just endured their worst Six Nations in 14 years. They were 9th in the world. Joe Schmidt's legacy has to be a positive one.
Yeah, of course. It's not without. I don't see that's ever in question. I think it's just people are just so disappointed with how we've underperformed at the World Cup, probably on the back of how strong we've been up to this point. But you just have to look at it. Like Joe even said it himself. He said, I'm gutted now at the moment, but I want to look back over the 6 years that I was here and take the positives out of that, which I think winning, like having a 75%, close on 75% win rate is phenomenal for any coach. So, it's disappointing, but that's where we are now.
Speaking when the team arrived home on Tuesday in Dublin Airport, Peter O'Mahony said that not only has he changed the direction of my career, but he's changed the direction of the team and of the careers of the guys who are still in primary and secondary school. His legacy will live on. Ireland are now up at the top of the world stage, but it's a matter of kicking on from here, right? Yeah,
I think Andy Farrell is going to have a tough job in terms of coming in and following on the continuity from what Joe has done, and he's got to impose his own coaching style, which he will no doubt. But I think if you want to make Joe Schmidt, if we wanted to make Joe Schmidt's job easier over the last 6 years, if we want to make Andy Farrell's job easier, it's actually starting at the lower levels and improving the coaching at the lower levels from under 10s, under 8s, all the way up. So when Andy Farrell inherits players or when he calls players into the national camp, that they're better players and he's afforded more leeway with what he wants to do with his game plan. I think that's the limiting factor. And when you look at the way New Zealand can play, that's their big strength, is that all of their players have a higher skill set.
It is hard not to be, I suppose, critical of Joe Schmidt after a performance like that at the World Cup. Ireland really never got going in 2019, full stop. He said something interesting during the week. He said he had never taken a day off in 6.5 years. In any profession, regardless of what it is, that's not healthy. And this obsessive nature in coaching has to filter down to the players, right?
Yeah, for sure. Like, you got to have some sort of balance. But the one thing about coaching as well is that it's so short-term focused, in that, like, you don't get a job as a coach and say, I'm going to be here now for the next 25 years, so I got to really get a real good work-life balance. It is important to get balance in there, and it does. If coaches if they're taking too much on board, it can transmit onto the players, which can be a negative thing. But I think that Joe was just so determined, and maybe he had this decision that he was going to step out after this World Cup. That's why he was pouring everything into it. The fact that the players would not be dealing with Joe week in, week out over the 6 years. They come into national camp, it's intense then, and that's always been the strength of the Irish team is, players come in, they understand that Joe's going to be on them right from the start, so they get up to speed, they have all their detail nailed down, so when they go on the pitch, they can implement the game plan. Through the World Cup, it was probably tough for the players because it can be very intense, but that's a World Cup, and I think it's Joe who'll really have paid the cost on if he hasn't taken a day off in 6.5 years.
Most people watching won't have experienced anything like that, the pressure cooker of a World Cup, but most importantly, the pressure of a coaching role. You have. Did you find it like that you literally couldn't take a day off?
I didn't find that you couldn't take a day off. Like, there would be days when you wouldn't have any involvement with the team, but it's very much, it's always in your mind. Coaching is always in your mind, because I suppose I didn't see it so much of a, like, when I was coaching Munster, so it was the team that I played with, and I was from the area, so I would be, even on if I'm in the country, if I'm in Limerick particularly, like, I'm going to always have people talking to me about rugby, and so you don't actually take a mental break from it there. The only time I would get a mental break is if I went on holidays with my family. It's a skill that you have to have, where you can learn to switch off, or learn to be able to relax and just box off what you can, and then say, okay, well, now I need to be. You can be physically present at home, but it's just as important to be mentally present, and that's the challenge of coaching for me anyway.
Ireland stagnated this year after an incredible 2018, and one of the reasons it's been pointed at is, and we talked about it last week, as a positive was Joe Schmidt's loyalty to certain players, his generals, his lieutenants, whatever phrase you want to use. Did that kill us in the end? This idea that certain players were not guaranteed their starting place, but someone either needed to really knock them out, or they needed to be injured or really out of form in order for them to be dropped?
I don't know if it's... the reason that we had such expectation going into the World Cup is off the back of the selections that Joe made. So to say that it actually killed us in the end, well, it's what built up the expectation, is those players delivering over those 6 years. I suppose in hindsight you look at it and you go, well, could we potentially have had a little bit more creativity in the team? I'm not sure. Like, I think a lot of it comes down. The guy that stands out for me is Joey Carberry, and I know that Joe is, would be a big fan of Joey's, and would see what Joey can give you on the field, and having his creativity along with Johnny Sexton would make us a far more dangerous team. But I think the reality is that Joey missed the last Six Nations, and you saw that, like, Joe did try and spread some game time. Jack Carthy played quite a lot in the Six Nations, but we didn't get Joey on the field enough. And then, in the World Cup warm-ups, I thought Joey had an outstanding game against Italy, and then, he was injured then, and we didn't see him till he came in for the third game.
Yeah, and speaking on the likes of Joey Carberry will be 28 when Paris rolls around in 2023. Jordan Larmour will be 26. Has this been almost a waste of a tournament in terms of their talent? I know some of it was out of Joe Schmidt's hands with Carberry's injury, but when we see players like Severis for New Zealand starting, for example, have we almost, I don't know, done away with their talent or wasted a really, really key World Cup for them?
No, I don't think so, because we everyone would have tried their best going into that World Cup, and it wasn't good enough, and that was the problem. It's not that we had this talent that we didn't utilise. Like you said, Joey wasn't utilised down to not being fit. Jordan, when he played, performed well. Possibly could we have looked at maybe working Jordan into the team earlier in last year, potentially, but Rob Kearney delivered in 2018 massively for us, so that's why Rob was backed. It's a difficult one, but I don't think it's right. Like, if they're 26 and 28, those guys would be in their peak then, you know.
One last thing I want to take a look at were Eason Asay was comments yesterday. Again, another one of kind of Schmidt's generals at Leinster. And he said that the Irish team took some of that attacking flair out that was there in 2018. The comments themselves aren't that inflammatory, but it's interesting that they come from someone like Nasewa. We've seen almost a reluctance from former Irish players who have been under Joe Schmidt for a few years to criticise. Is this the beginning of the opening of the floodgates? Do you think we're going to get more of an insight into the camp now over the next year from players and former players?
I think people are going to talk a little bit more freely around Joe now, because he's not the national coach. When he's the national coach, everyone's going to, look after themselves and say, well, if I criticise Joe, I'm not going out there. Like, if you're looking to people in the media will love to hear criticism on Joe now, because he's been lauded for the last 6.5 years. But he's been lauded because he's probably been the best coach that Ireland have ever had. And then seeing someone like Issa come out and say that, who's been very, very, himself and Joe seem to have a very tight relationship. I don't think he's saying anything that Joe probably wouldn't say himself. Well, possibly we did lose a little bit of creativity, but it was, our hand was forced at times, So it's difficult. The World Cup was a disappointment. It didn't go well for us. I think that what Joe came in and did was he put in place structures that meant that he was getting the best out of all the players there as much as he could. The thing is, the structure is that structure is going to take away a little bit of people playing the opportunity in front of them. But I think that, and the balance of just going out there and saying just play what you see, lads, versus this is what a structured game plan can do for us. I think the structured game plan got us a huge amount of success. It's towards the end we just looked a little like we relied on that a little bit too much. But you can only have those guys and say play heads up rugby when they've got the ability to unlock teams. And I'm not sure if we had, if that was a strength of ours going into the World Cup.
Jerry, England, New Zealand, it's a classic World Cup semi-final. England have a dreadful record against the All Blacks in recent years. It's 1 win in 16 for them. Now, they haven't played them a lot in recent years, and we might get into that a little bit later. But the team selections are a bit interesting for this one. So Sam Cane has been dropped by the All Blacks and Scott Barrett comes in. I wonder what you thought about that from a forwards point of view. Scott Barrett's never played in the back row at a test level, and he's been dropped in for his first ever start in the back row for a World Cup semi-final.
Well, you want to try and get your best players on the field all the time. And I think the fact that England or New Zealand have been playing with 2 sevens in Kane and Sevilla meant they could probably afford to take Sam Cane out. And I think Scott Barrett has been close on. He's been close on their best player during this World Cup. In terms of, everyone's focusing on Barrett, Mwanga, and the impact they're having on games. But when you get someone like Scott Barrett stepping up and performing the way he has done, particularly in the South African game, which was pivotal in starting their World Cup run, I think he's been phenomenal for them. So they're trying to get him on the field. They're not losing an awful lot in terms of a presence on the ground because they already have Sevilla running as a 7. I think it's a really smart move. Scott Barrett's ball carry, his distribution, so much of what he's doing has been really, really positive for the All Blacks. So I think it's a form selection for them, and it's a good one. They probably didn't envisage it at the start of the tournament. They envisage we'll get Retallick back. If Scott Barrett goes well for us, great, that'll get us through to where we are. But now they can't afford to not have Scott Barrett in the side, so that's a great place.
Speaking of bringing players in on form, George Ford was not dropped, according to Eddie Jones, but he was had his role changed for the quarterfinal against Australia. He's back in at 10 and on Farrell shifted out to 12. It kind of suggested that Eddie Jones feels they were missing something against Australia, or there's another step up in this English team.
I'm not sure. I think looking at it, I'd say in the Australian game with Karevi playing and seeing how Australia played in the past, they'll use Karevi to go after that channel where Ford would have been if he was starting at 10. So I think they probably strengthen themselves by taking Ford out of the mix there and getting him to come in as a finisher. The All Blacks, I don't think will focus quite so much on going after a weakness of the opposition, as in if they see Ford as potentially not a potentially strong, maybe he's not the strongest defender. I don't think the All Blacks will go out of their way to run at him. The All Blacks will focus on playing their game, and maybe that allows Eddie Jones is thinking, well, I can get an extra playmaker in now, and that's why I thought Henry Slade was good the last day. I'm surprised it's happened, but Eddie Jones is his own man, and he was quite forthright with the journalists who challenged him on why he'd dropped or why he'd changed George Ford's role. So it was fair enough.
You used a word there that's kind of crept into the rugby lexicon in the last few years, which is a finisher, right? Now, I don't know how much I agree with that. I get the whole changing the role thing. Yes, the game of rugby has changed. Your bench is as strong as your starting 15, all that kind of stuff. As a player, you want to start those games. This idea of we've just altered his role. You're still massively annoyed as a player sitting on the bench at a Rugby World Cup.
Yeah, Yeah, it's something that I've come across coaching as well, and Rassi used to make a point of it as saying, like, the guys who finish are the guys who actually, Rassi used to say, like, I want to be on the field. When I was a player, he said, I wanted to be on the field when we were winning the game, when we won the game, when the final whistle went. He said, I didn't want to come in and do the job for the first 40, but I think there's a little bit of ego wrapped up in it, because you want to be the guy that's out there when the game starts and feel like you've won the jersey. So it is a difficult one, and it's a little bit of a hard sell. Maybe it's coaches, like when Eddie Jones is saying it to George Ford, it's possibly trying to keep those guys as invested in the team's interests as possible by saying, this is how I view your role. It's not a case of, oh, he's getting tired, so I'm going to bring you in. It said, you're going to come in and win the game for me. If you look at, it, it's whatever way Eddie Jones pitches it to the players, and if the players buy into it and believe in it, then that's the reality. And with the modern game now, like, people rarely, like, you rarely leave someone on for 80 minutes if there's a replacement there, because particularly at a World Cup, the standard of your bench shouldn't be miles below what you have on the field. So if people go out there and they absolutely empty the tank for 60 minutes, then make a change, freshen it up.
Would you have bought into that as a player? If a coach came to you at a Rugby World Cup or in a Heineken Cup quarterfinal or whatever it happened to be and said, Jerry, you're taking the 16 jersey, but I believe in you, you're going to come on and win us this game, would you have bought that?
If the coach says it to you and you believe in it, but I'd still prefer to start.
Okay.
I would prefer to start all the time, but maybe that will change now over the next 5 to 10 years. That players will be seen as in, like, the guys who come in, your finishers, the guys who are on the bench are as important. But the ego part of it, for me, when I was a player, it was always about who had the jersey, who had the starting hooker's jersey, and that's the one I wanted to get. But if coaches are consistent with it all the way through their tenure, then you buy into it as a player.
Something that was noticeable in the packs in the England-Australia game was the head patting that was going on, right? So the scrum was an absolute battleground in that game, but I haven't seen it like that in a long, long time. We talked about the marginal gains and celebrating the little victories, and Japan did that really well. But the arrogance of patting someone on the head after they've given away a penalty, would you recommend that as a coach, or did you experience it as a player?
I saw Latu doing it to Sinclair, but I think that some players will people will specifically target someone like Kyle Sinclair because they think, look, this guy he's got a pretty short fuse, and if we can take him off task by getting into a little bit of mind games with him, it's pretty irritating. It's not something I would have coached, because again, you're putting the player's focus. You're trying to say, listen, I want you to spend most of your focus trying to take this guy off his game. Like, winning the scrum penalty is enough. You're winning the scrum penalty, and if you don't need to specifically go after and rub heads and stuff like that, because you end up annoying referees as well, and it's not a good picture. You celebrate those little wins. So when you win that scrum penalty, the more you celebrate that, the more you should be getting into your opposite number's head.
Speaking of annoying referees, Owen Farrell kind of fell foul of Garces in the last game a couple of times. He was told at one point, penalty, go away. And the second one, a little bit later on, when England lost one of those scrum penalties, he kind of threw his arms out, and it was a real schoolboy kind of moment. Nigel Owens won't let that happen this weekend. It's important that Owen Farrell, as captain, keeps his head, and more importantly, keeps Nigel Owens on side, particularly against New Zealand. Yeah,
I think, look, it's Owen Farrell has his own, that's his manner is probably pretty direct and challenging. That's the way he is as a player. That's I think that's how he leads England. And Jerome Garces, if he feels that, listen, I don't want to interact here, this is a clean cut decision for me, he'll just say go away. It may not be a reflection that Farrell is probably being petulant with him or being petty with him. It's just saying, listen, the decision is made, and there is no leeway in my mind. I don't need to justify it to you. But you definitely, particularly coming into the New Zealand game, they want to try and get the referees on board. And Nigel Owens generally will we spoke about it before, the ability to adapt to what Nigel Owens is going to officiate. Nigel Owens is going to officiate is a real challenge, because he wants the game to be a spectacle. He wants to let the game unfold, and that's why people will generally look at him and say he's one of the best referees in the world, because of the rugby that gets played when he referees it. It doesn't always it doesn't always translate to consistency and everything. Like you may have played 3 games up to a game with Nigel Owens with the laws being officiated a certain way, and then Nigel will officiate them. Now, he'll be consistent for both sides, but it's just how quickly you adapt to that.
Yeah, and I think you kind of allowing that free-flowing rugby means that there's a lot more being allowed at the breakdown. And you would have seen that in New Zealand and Ireland last weekend, some clear-outs in from the side, things that were let go. There's been a recurrent trend in the World Cup this year where referees are warning players. So if a player goes in and it's like hands away or step back or you're offside, and you were getting these warnings, and it allows the game to flow. But clever teams like England and New Zealand have kind of used that, I think, to their own advantage, where they're kind of going in, knowing that they're going against the laws, and then taking their warning and then backing off and then getting, a pat on the back and well done. Teams can abuse that to a certain extent, can't they?
Yeah, if there's any ambiguity there around the laws, players will try and hedge their bets to try and create a competitive advantage. And it can be, referees shouldn't coach the opposition. They shouldn't coach either team on the field. What the referee can do is use his his direction on the game to try and allow the game to flow. And if something is not having a material effect on the game, but he can see a player starting to encroach, he can just say to that player, listen, you got to stay on side here, or this is a ruck, hands out. But when players come in and deliberately are slowing the ball down and the referee is telling him hands off, hands off, hands off, and then that player looks at him, then takes his hands off the ball, he's already slowed the ball down. So he's already had a little win for his side. Yeah. That's where referees have got to be pretty hard on them.
Yeah. This is set up between the free-flowing rugby we can expect from Owens officiating, between the two teams, probably the two best teams in the world at the moment. This is set up to be an absolute classic. New Zealand and England have only met once in the last 5 years, and that was in Twickenham last year, which again was a brilliant game. Steve Hanson's been quite critical this week of the Six Nations and how insular they are and how protective they are and how we're not moving towards this World Rugby League, Nations League. Is he right? Like, should we be seeing more of these northern-southern hemisphere absolute titanic clashes?
Look, everyone's excited because you're going to see the two. What we've seen is the two best sides in the World Cup so far playing each other in the semi, and people are going, well, why isn't this happening more frequently? And he's probably alluding to that, but there's a whole myriad of factors as to why this isn't happening enough. And when they tried to put this thing together the last time, they didn't really consult the players, and players are already finding it difficult. The physicality of the modern game, the amount of matches, they have to be consulted on that, and I don't think that happened, and that's probably why this. Ideally, I would love to see the top club side in Europe play in the Northern Hemisphere, play the top club side in Super Rugby. These are games that people want to see, but the season is only so long, and you can only pack in so many games there. So that's probably where it is.
We're reaching the end of the international season this year, and this is one of the last games of the year. How do you see it playing out?
Well, look, it's easy to say that New Zealand are the favourites because they have the best players, and they were pretty clinical against Ireland, albeit Ireland played really poorly as well. I don't think New Zealand have actually shown. I don't think either side have really shown their hand in terms of how good they can be. What's scary is that New Zealand have really cruised through to get to here, but I think, unfortunately, Ireland really didn't challenge them. I don't think Australia challenged England at all either. I think the way Australia play, England were able to just sit back and say, if we give you the ball, you'll create the opportunities for us in your half, and that's how it unfolded. To be honest, I think England I think it's going to be a really tight game. I think New Zealand's ability to transition from defence to attack is probably where the game is going to be won for them.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. That is all we have time for on today's episode of the JOEpan Rugby Show, brought to you by Sports Joe in association with Air Sport. A reminder that England v New Zealand is available on the Air Sport package this Saturday. Kick-off in that one is at 9 a.m. Irish time, with coverage starting at 8 o'clock. We'll be back a little later on in the week as we look ahead to the other semi-final between South Africa and Wales and continue our debrief on another lacklustre Irish World Cup campaign. We'll see you then.